There's one thing no one has understood about what happened in Chamberlain on prom night. The press hasn't understood it, the scientists at Duke University haven't understood it, David Congress hasn't understood it, and certainly the White Commission, which used me as a handy scapegoat, did not understand it. This one thing is the most fundamental fact. We were kids. Older kids react in more socially acceptable ways than younger kids, but they still have a way of making bad decisions, of overreacting, of underestimating. That was from My Name is Sue Snell, a 1986 memoir within Carrie, a horror fiction novel by Stephen King published in 1974 that is set in 1979 and of which a film adaptation was made in 1976 and set in present day. 1976 present day, not present day, which would have been the future then and not present day, but present day now. I'm still not sure why the book is set 5 years in the future from when it was published, but look, I love that quote because it encapsulates what Carrie is really about. As we grow through life, we don't ever outgrow the fear of the uncontrollable, and in an attempt to control the uncontrollable, we make terrible decisions. More specifically, fear of the natural and unavoidable course of biology has led to a societal ethos of misogyny that stems from a mutual fear and awe of the mysteries that the female body is capable of. And if I may say, it's obvious, God-given, nature-given, whatever power you want to believe in, given superiority of the male body for what it is capable of. I want to be very clear at the start of this that this book was written in 1974, published in 1974, and while transgender people were definitely part of our population, the discussion around trans rights and trans identity and other forms of gender identity were not really at the forefront of people's minds. So when I make these statements about male versus female, I'm doing it from the view of 1970s Mars and Venus, right? There we go. There's my disqualifier, my disclaimer. That's the word I'm looking for. Whew, that medication. Back to the point. The book actually seems slightly dated in its blanket view of men and women and its misogynistic tone until you realize it is an examination of systemic societal misogyny by a male author, acknowledging his own fears and writing an allegory of the absolute destruction that men are scared of should they allow women to realize themselves fully. And when I realized that halfway through the novel, it was like a light bulb went on bright over my head and then dimmed suddenly, before pulsing bright again, and then dim and bright and dim and bright and dim and bright and dim and bright, as I began to wonder, is Carrie actually a feminist novel? Welcome to David's Den. I'm David. This is my den. Okay, it's a virtual backdrop in my den because I live in a tiny New York City apartment and it's pretty cluttered, so I don't want you to see it. But I love to read and I love to watch movies. So I decided to start a YouTube channel where I would talk about those things. And how better to start off that type of channel than with a Stephen King readathon? You know, because nearly every book he has ever written has been adapted for the screen, and I enjoy horror. So I'm going to be doing book club style literary reviews here in the Book Nook, like I'm doing today, film reviews over in the screening room, and then I'm bringing the Book Nook into the screening room for adaptation correlations, where I compare the adaptation to the source material, and all with no spoilers. Mostly. Okay, look, I'll do my best to announce them, okay? And I'm announcing it now. For Book Nook reviews, there are very minor spoilers ahead. As I will be examining thematic elements in the Book Nook, I will be citing examples, but nothing that I believe will actually spoil the book for you. If you want to come on this journey with me, go ahead and like this video and hit that subscribe button. While I have researched the works being discussed in the socio-political climate of the time they were released, I have not read or watched any reviews or criticism. Any ideas that bear a resemblance to thoughts posited by a real person are strictly coincidental. Also, no animals were harmed in the making of this video. Adopt, don't shop. Carrie is the story of Carrie White, a high school senior who has been hyper-sheltered by her religiously fanatic mother. Carrie has been fed lies about her own body through the veil of religious truth and sin, or just not told things. She is the school scapegoat in a small town where everyone knows everyone, and she has been relentlessly bullied from grade school on. The book even opens with Carrie terrified and hysterical in the gym showers, being pelted with tampons by the other girls as she ignorantly experiences her first period and thinks she is bleeding to death. Certain it is because she sinned. Yes, that's spelled with a capital S. Sinned. As Carrie's puberty goes into full swing, as she begins to acknowledge her own body and her natural maturation into a woman, as she begins to see it as something not to be ashamed of, but rather as something to embrace, she begins to develop telekinetic powers that only grow stronger with her understanding, and with it, the fear. As the book says, her mind was filled with the huge knowledge of powers and of an abyss. And I would hazard to say that King was referring not only to her telekinetic powers, but to the powers that women have over men. Powers that make men feel weak and woozy. And back to my disclaimer from the beginning, I'm even a gay man, so trust me, the lens this is coming through is from the 70s men and women. Okay, sorry, I don't know why I wanted to interrupt there, but I felt it and I did it. Here we go. Where was I? Powers that make men feel weak and woozy, that make them feel like men, as much as it emasculates them. Powers that men both adore and abhor. And then when the bullies at school decide to play the prank of all pranks at the senior prom, well, Carrie's rage is inflamed, literally, and her revenge is savage and final. Look, I promise there are no spoilers there, even though it sounds like I gave away the ending. The writing style of Carrie bounces through time, told in the forward-moving timeline of the present from multiple points of view, including Carrie herself, her mother, her gym teacher, the school principal, the bullies, the pranksters, and even Sue Snell, the writer of the memoir mentioned at the beginning of this video. Frequently interrupting that narrative are excerpts from Sue Snell's memoir, recounting the horror that happened on prom night, excerpts from reports by the White Commission, which was created to investigate that night, and even published scientific articles outlining what is known about the phenomenon of telekinesis and its dangers, the threat it poses, and how it relates to female puberty. Yeah? By throwing these interruptions into the forward-moving plot, we are told from the very beginning that we are building to prom night, and that something terrible is going to happen. This technique does a fantastic job in creating suspense, which I discuss more in depth in the halfway through review. You can check that out here, but don't judge me. I hadn't figured out this fancy setup yet, and I was still trying to do a thing wearing my comfy onesie and the Book Nook curled up in the corner. But I also discussed some thoughts on themes in that halfway through review, but those thoughts have actually changed now that I've finished the book. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There was so much suspense built up around prom night that when we got to it with so much of the book remaining, I was legitimately worried that the buildup was going to lead to a drawn-out night that would feel anticlimactic. No. From the moment that Carrie is waiting to be picked up by her date through to almost dawn, the night is told from multiple perspectives, personal and physical perspectives. And once the horror actually begins and Carrie's rage moves from the school and into the neighborhood, we see it from the point of the view of Carrie herself, as well as 4 different points in town, from north, south, east, and west, effectively. So we are in the town ourselves, experiencing the horror in 3 dimensions. Someone hears an explosion and sees the flames, so we hear the explosion and see the flames too, and it catches us off guard, diverting our attention and raising questions. It isn't until the next section, or even the section after that, when we are privy to the thoughts from someone across town, that we learn what caused the explosion, or hear of its aftermath. And the events only get bigger, and the emotions run higher each time we switch perspective, but somehow we are always still privy to the first-person point of view of Carrie herself. It kept the suspense palpable for a very long time. From StephenKing.com, it is said that the character of Carrie herself was inspired by a composite of 2 girls Stephen King knew during high school. The story is largely about how women find their own channels of power and what men fear about women and women's sexuality. I said in the halfway through review that the theme was wider than that because the first half is really relatable, using universal themes of puberty and the fear and insecurity of what is happening to our own bodies, while we also navigate the social pressures of high school. Our way into that mentality was through Carrie, with all of her sheltered, hyper-religious ignorance of life. But the second half of the book, it changed my opinion, and I think that all of that only serves to support the overall theme, which is rooted in King's inspiration, in what men fear about women and women's sexuality. Carrie does feel a little misogynistic right from the start, and you think, well, it's just generally accepted views of the time it was written in. Men are strong and powerful, and women are weak and emotional, Mars and Venus. But then you realize the book is actually about how women are societally and emotionally stifled when they actually have the power to break free. And men are so very scared of that. Carrie points out that the power men hold in this world is actually very fragile, and therefore it is seen as something that must be protected by limiting a woman's power, even making women falsely believe that they don't have any. But men also love, adore, and revere women for all the same reasons that they fear them. For everything that their bodies can do and everything that their bodies do to men too. So the novel is this examination of the repression of women through misogyny to the point that they don't even know that they have any strength. But Carrie finds all of that repressed power, and it has no choice but to explode, which is very representative of the time that this novel was written, in the height of the sexual revolution and the women's liberation movements. As Carrie comes into her womanhood, as she acknowledges the natural order of things that she did not know, and begins to feel and even relish her newfound sexuality and sensuality, when she refuses to be stifled anymore, when she demands to be heard and doles out retribution for the repression and abuse that has been forced on her. Fires rage uncontrollably. Men are stripped of their power to contain her. Everyone is stripped of their power to contain her, but there is a certain feeling you get as the fire rages, and the recurring mention of helpless fire men in the semantics of the novel. Blood is everywhere, and the imagery never fails to harken back to the opening scene of the book, sometimes directly referencing it and highlighting the shame Carrie felt at her menstruation while pairing it with the power she feels now. The incredible, supernatural power, which we are told through medical journals appears with the onset of puberty, the budding of womanhood. And then, as if to hammer the point home, there is a motif running through the book of telekinesis being a genetic, solely feminine trait, just like the powers of birth and creation. It is an unstoppable force of nature. The power is, and has always been there, locked under the surface and occasionally fighting to break through, but there is a war waged by men to keep it reined in, to keep it contained. But if Carrie has anything to do with it, the destruction of societal norms and female repression is coming, along with a violent reckoning for the wrongs done to half of the human population. I think this actually might be the most feminist novel written by a male author from a male perspective. Maybe that's why the book is set in the future, so we know to be ready for the explosion. So we know to accept it because we cannot stop it. But, that's a stretch. I would love to talk more about it, but I think that it would be too spoiler heavy. You know what? Okay. Here is your warning. There are general spoilers ahead, no major plot points, but maybe information a little more specific than you would like before you read the book. If you would like to skip the spoilers and cut to my final thoughts, just forward to the timestamp I'm putting right here. Go ahead, I'll wait. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, good, they're gone. Look, so on the topic of telekinesis running through the female line and reaching a boiling point as metaphor for women's liberation, Carrie, Sue, Chris, even Miss Desjardins, the young first-year gym teacher, we see them all growing up and realizing their power, but using it in different ways, but all still repressed to some extent. These girls, or young women, only realize a partial amount of the strength they have in the world. They grow into adults, into women, but still don't fully claim their power because they live in a man's world. And King shows us this phenomenon at every stage of growth, every stage of life. Carrie is the child, right? She's innocent and full of fear. She knows nothing about men or sex. She is ruled by fear instilled through religion. and not rooted in any sort of fact, only in male-created and male-dominated theology. So ingrained in society that it is even taught to her by her own mother. Then Chris. Chris is the adolescent, a bully, who is afraid of not being the most popular. She's all about image and how she is seen by the others, but she also understands that she has the power to manipulate men through sex and sensuality, even if it does backfire in an abusive relationship that keeps her in her place. Sue then represents the young woman, maturing as she is about to move into the world on her own, and she also realizes that she can control her boyfriend Tommy with her feminine wiles, but she is maturing emotionally, feeling empathy for Carrie. Even though she makes a strong argument for Tommy to take Carrie to the prom, and even though he gives in, ultimately Sue still defers to his decision. If he had said no, I believe she would have found a different way to make amends for the shower incident that would have been a more direct apology. As a first-year teacher, Miss Desjardins, Desjardins, I don't know how the f to say her name. They changed it to Miss Collins in the movie because I think they didn't know how to either. Whatever her name is, she's a first-year teacher and she's a fully matured woman, but still young. And she's still learning how to navigate her way through the world. I mean, it's a man's world! This is why I don't do musical theater, but Lena Hall, I love you, and that's one of my favorite recordings of yours live. This is a man's world! It wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl. Anyway, Miss Desjardins, she tries to make things right with the girls after the shower incident, and she taps into a maternal instinct to take care of Carrie. But she still works within the established system, looking to the male principal, assistant principal actually, to make things right because that's just the way things are. Then Carrie's mother, Margaret White, is the oldest woman we meet, the most aged and mature, but she is so steeped in religion and in misguided tradition, passing that on to the next generation, illustrating a violently repressive, systemic misogyny that is so ingrained that women pass along those terrible views to their own daughters, disguised as unchangeable dogma. It's a man's world indeed. You know, maybe Margaret White isn't the oldest woman in the book, because we do learn that Carrie's great-grandmother was telekinetic. Even though we don't ever meet her, her power was ignored, though never fully acknowledged or developed, and now it has been passed down to Carrie. She was just seen as an odd woman. Then the book even ends with, and trust me, this is not a spoiler, it is thematically relevant, but otherwise the last 2 pages of Carrie have nothing to do with the rest of the book. It ends with a letter from a woman to her sister, neither one of whom is involved with Carrie or her family or even the geographic region. In this letter, the woman is noticing her young daughter exhibiting early signs of telekinesis, like we learn Carrie did when she was a child. But this is a power that this woman's grandmother had as well, proving that an incident like prom night can and probably will happen again if this power remains ignored, remains hidden, if it remains contained. I would say the book maintains that in actuality, a woman's power is what makes men revere and hold women in absolute awe, which then leads to fear, which is the root of misogyny. And by the way, thanks for sticking with me. If you skip to the timestamp, we're done with all of the spoilers. I'm just wrapping up. But as I was saying, King's book asserts that men, without consciously realizing the thought, believe that they have to stay in control because women are too much for them to handle. And it is rooted in the body, the blood, and Carrie was red and dripping with it. They had drenched her in the very secretness of the blood, in front of all of them. She was seen by everyone who had contained her, everyone who had kept her ignorant and forced her to blindly adopt a reality of powerless servitude and utter helplessness that was actually a man-made lie, passed down both through men and women. After all, Carrie's power, woman's power, is biological, it's natural. It is impossible to overcome inferiority as a man because nature has decreed that men are biologically inferior. There is nothing left to do for a male-driven society but fight to contain the threat until it cannot be contained anymore. Carrie was an instant success when it was published. Surprising for a first novel from any author, but rightfully earned. It is a fun, quick read with relatable characters pushed to the extreme and a horrific climax built to with perfectly crafted suspense. But digging deeper, Carrie was also a very timely novel that celebrated women in a time when a male-driven society was actively trying to quench an uprising that would acknowledge, at the very least, the possibility that women aren't inferior. Carrie dared to question whether women are actually superior to men, and if that superiority was the root of a societal evolution of men who are only in control because they fear women and seek to contain their power. And that effort of containment is systemic. It has taken hundreds of generations and thousands of years to cultivate the societal ethos of misogyny. That is what raises Carrie above with the horror genre. And that is what turned it into a book that is now considered a classic, must-read novel in the fiction genre in general. Look, I finished Carrie about a week ago now, and it still has me reeling, thinking about systemic misogyny and its wider implications in today's climate, putting a spotlight on systemic racism. Could it really be that simple? That we're all just afraid of the power that stems from our differences? That through the power of logic and science and discussion and empathy, those last two powers are usually classified as strictly feminine traits, by the way, but maybe horrific events could be avoided through education and knowledge, which breed understanding and empathy. See, there we go again, feminine traits. Fear could be abolished and societal inequality could be avoided, maybe. But I think those are my own ramblings, and Carrie wasn't published in 2021. It was published in 1974. I'll still give the book a full 5 stars. I think you should read it. Thanks for visiting David's Den. Did you agree with my assessment? Did you disagree? Did you laugh at my stupid ramblings? Or did you have a light bulb revelation? Look, I want to know your thoughts. So please comment down below. And if you did enjoy the video, remember to hit that like button and please share it with your friends. If you want to come on the adaptation correlation journey or the Stephen King readathon with me, also hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video from David's Den. See you next time.